this again. So Dr. Taylor Byas is a PhD with pronouns she and her, and she's a Black Chicago native currently living in Cincinnati, Ohio, where she's an amazing editor, all right, too. So she's an assistant features editor for the Rumpus, a poetry acquisition editor for the Variant Literature, and an editorial board member for Beloit Poetry Journal. She's the first place winner of the 2020 Poetry Superhighway, 2020 Frontier Poetry Award for New Poets Contest, and the 2021 Adrienne Rich Poetry Prize, and a 2023-24 National Book Critics Circle Emerging Fellow. She is the author of the chapbooks Bloodworm and Shudder. I don't have Shudder. I'm sorry. That's the one I don't have. So Shudder and the debut, I done clicked my heels 3 times from Soft Skull Press. She's represented by Rena Rossner of the Deborah Harris Agency. And I just wanted to let everybody know, because this is Sestina Day, when I first got this book and I opened up the first poem, my Twitter feed becomes too much. It's a Sestina, okay? It is a Sestina. This book also has another Sestina, voicemail to Madam C.J. Walker, right? And this book, I'm like a Sestina freak, because it's like, how do people do this, right? Drunken monologue from an alcoholic father's oldest daughter. All right, so we got the queen, one of the queens of Sestina's here with us today. So please, everybody, give Dr. Byas a warm welcome. I'm gonna move my pin and I'm gonna pin her.
Thank you so much, Melinda.
Okay.
Thank you for mentioning my Twitter feed becomes too much as well, because hopefully we'll talk about it a little bit today. So thank you all so much for being here, for allowing me to come into your space and to talk about something that I love so much, which is poetry form, and in particular a form that I am always really excited about. So I'm gonna go ahead. I'm like the presentations are like my jam. I love presentations. That's one thing that you will learn very quickly about me. So here we are. Sestina says. So I always like to start my Sestina workshops with just a very brief conversation about how we feel about Sestina. So for those of us who are familiar with Sestinas, who have attempted a Sestina, who have maybe never attempted a Sestina and have particular reasons why, I would love for you to just very quickly put into the chat how you feel about the Sestina. And if you have no idea what a Sestina is, you can also express that as well. But I would just love to know very quickly how we all feel. Frustrating, fun, hard to pull off, can be tedious when not well done. Yes, ambivalent, fair enough. Beautiful, but challenging. Yes. Constricting. Yes. Satisfying to read. Agree. It's a complete mystery. Impossible. I always give up. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The form makes me go places I hadn't thought of originally. Good. Right words are hard to find. Good. Have not yet been successful. Been there. I sometimes wonder why. A math problem. I love thinking of it as a math problem. Yeah. Yeah. So good. So easy to get bogged down in Sestina, begins to sound repetitive. Yeah. So a lot of similar feelings, right? Some excitement, but a lot of us are feeling like it's sort of a mystery. It's a lot to handle. It's a difficult sort of form to kind of wrangle, which it is. It's definitely a difficult one to wrangle, but it's definitely worth it, as many of us have said in the chat as well. So just a little background about where it comes from, just so we're kind of all on the same page. The Sestina is attributed to Arnaut Daniel, the Provençal troubadour of the 12th century. The name troubadour likely comes from trebar, which means to invert or compose verse. and the troubadours sing their verses accompanied by music and were quite competitive, each trying to top the next in wit as well as complexity and difficulty of style. And then, of course, the Sestina eventually migrated to Italy, where the poets Dante and Petrarch practiced the form. I like to talk about the sort of origins of the Sestina because in the same way that I think it's helpful to think about the sort of sonnet as kind of a little song, I think it's also helpful to remember that the Sestina has roots and has origins in music. Because I think when we think about the form now, it's very easy to just think of it as this very dense, heavy form. And I think that's kind of one of the roadblocks that I used to have when trying to approach the form. But I like to always remember that there is a sort of musical origin to the form. What does it look like? What are the rules? So part of the reason why it's so difficult is, first of all, it's 39 lines long, featuring the intricate repetition of N words in 6 stanzas and an envoy. So there's 6 stanzas that are 6 lines, and then that final 7th stanza is 3 lines. But the sort of tricky thing about it is the N-word pattern, the sort of elaborate, complex pattern of N-words and the way that they have to repeat themselves, which is this, what you see here, this numbered list here. These are the sort of N-words that we'll talk about in just a little bit. And as we are writing sort of at the end of our time together, I will make sure that I put this N-word order in the chat so you have it there to look at as you're writing. But this is sort of just an overview of what the Sestina looks like. You have those 6 stanzas that are 6 lines long, and those N-words have to appear in this order. And then that last one, the envoy, which is what it's called, it's also supposed to have all 6 N-words in it in that very particular order. This looks very crazy. So we're going to look at some samples in just a little bit to see what this actually looks like in practice. But before we do that, I just wanted to talk about some of the big challenge or the biggest challenges of the Sestina. I mean, of course, it has many challenges, but I think some of the big things, of course, the repeated N words, how to make those repetitions feel new and feel fresh, especially when some of those repetitions are occurring, within, one line of each other, right next to each other. There's only sort of the space between stanzas for some of those repetitions. The density of a 6-line stanza, right? Sometimes a lot of us are, maybe are working in couplets or terzets or, 4-line stanzas. But having to sort of stick to a 6-line stanza, it starts to feel a little dense, especially if that's not sort of what you're used to doing. And then, of course, the length of the poem as a whole. Dear God, how do we get to line 39, right? Especially for those of us who are not used to writing poems that go that long. So these are sort of the biggest challenges that we're rubbing up against when we're thinking about the Sestina. So tips and tricks, right? Besides thinking about the fact that there's some musical origins for the Sestina, these are 4 things that I think are really, really important for me and have been really, really important for me when writing a Sestina that feels successful. So I think the first big thing is you have to bring your big ticket items. And what I mean by that is because the Sestina has so much space, it requires so many lines, you have to come to the page with a big ticket item or a topic that has enough sort of space for you to move around in. And we'll talk a little bit about of how we'll sort of move through that. But you have to make sure that you're bringing to the table a topic or content that is big enough for you to move around in. And I say move around in because number 2, I think you need to think about planning out rooms or movement in your Sestina. So we're going to be thinking about the Sestina as sort of like a multi-roomed thing that we can move around in, a multi-roomed home that has all these rooms that are connected, right, by content, but maybe there are some different things happening in those rooms. So be an architect, thinking about and planning out those rooms or those movements throughout the Sestina. 3, we're going to be thinking a lot about voice because I think voice is really, really important, especially when we're thinking about poems that require repetition. One of the most natural ways to think about repetition is voice, speech, right? We repeat and say things over and over again all the time when we're talking. So thinking about voice and how that can come into play in Sestina. And then 4, you have to get a little loose with your language. And I have a particular exercise that will help us a little bit with that. But these are my 4 tips and tricks. Bring your big ticket items, be an architect when planning out those rooms movements, play up the voice, get loose with language. So we're going to pause our handy dandy presentation here. We're going to switch over and look at 2 samples. The first one is a Sestina that is not by me, it's by the incredible Patricia Smith, who I consider to also be a queen of form. So this first one is Ethel Sestina. It has an epigraph, and you'll notice that for the most part, this Sestina, excuse me, sticks to the form pretty strictly, except for this one little section where you'll see this repetition sort of happen. This is kind of the only place where the Sestina breaks the form, but otherwise it sticks to it pretty strictly. So I'll read this one, and then I'll read this one, I'll read mine, and then we'll open up very briefly for comments and talk about what we notice in these, and then we'll sort of move into some writing exercises. Okay. Ethel Sestina. Ethel Freeman's body sat for days in her wheelchair outside the New Orleans Convention Center. Her son Herbert, who had assured his mother that help was on the way, was forced to leave her there once she died. And this poem is from Blood Dazzler, which is about Hurricane Katrina. Gonna be obedient in this here chair, gonna bide my time fanning against the sun. I ask my boy, and all he says is wait. He wipes my brow with steam, says I should sleep. I trust his every word. Herbert, my son, I believe him when he says help gonna come. Been so long since all these suffering folks come to this place. Now on the ground round my chair, they sweat in my shade, keep asking my son, could that be a bus they see? It's the sun fooling them, shining much too loud for sleep, making us hear engines, wheels. Not yet. Wait. Lord, some folks praying for rain while they wait, forgetting what rain can do. When it comes, it smashes living flat, wakes you from sleep, eats streets, washes you clean out of the chair you be sitting in. Best to praise this sun, shining its dry shine. Lord, have mercy, son, is it coming? Such a strong man, my son. Can't help but believe when he tells us, wait, wait some more. Wish some trees would block the sun. We wait. Ain't no white man or buses come, but look, see that there? Get me out this chair. Help me stand on up. No time for sleeping, because look what's rumbling this way. If you sleep, you gonna miss it. Look there, I tell my son. He don't hear. I'm about to get out this chair, but the ghost in my legs tells me to wait. Wait for the salvation that's sure to come. I see my Savior's face alongside that sun. Nobody sees me running towards the sun. Lord, they think I done gone and fell asleep. They don't hear come, 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 come. Ain't but what power make me leave my son? I can't wait, Herbert. Lord knows I can't wait. Don't cry, boy. I ain't in that chair no more. Wish you could have come on this journey, son. Seen that old sweet sun lift me out my sleep. Didn't have to wait. And see my golden chair. Okay. So that is Ethel Sestina. And I'll read my Sestina. My Twitter feed becomes too much. This is the first poem in my chapbook, Bloodborne. My Twitter feed becomes too much. I come across pictures of 2 rubber bullets nestled in a palm, their nose tips black and rounded like a reporter's foam-covered mic. The captions read, "These maim, break skin, cause blindness." Another photo, a hollow caved into a woman's scalp, floating hands in blue gloves dabbing at the spill. An offhand comment in the replies, are you sure that rubber bullet caused that type of damage? The question hollowed with genuine concern. The page refreshes. A black man melts into a street curb from exhaustion, his skin blotched with sweat and red. Protesters' hands cover his body, and this is church, a baptism. Cover me with the blood. And there are more. Hand-drawn threats, shoot the fuck back, police cars skinned of their lettering and paint from the bullet aim of Molotov cocktails and Budweiser bottles. Black Lives Matter, markered in thick letters below the hollow outline of the Black Power fist. A gas mask, eye hollows glinting with tears. The page refreshes. Undercover cops wearing matching armbands like a gang, a black army tank crawling through city streets the way a hand may tiptoe up a thigh. The page refreshes. A bullet list of places to donate if I can't put my skin in the game protesting in the streets. The snakeskin pattern of fires from a bird's eye view of DC. Hollowed Target storefronts. The page refreshes. Rubber bullets pinging a reporter and her crew as they run for cover. A white woman's reply, things are getting out of hand, punctuated with heart emojis. Protesters' shadows blacking the fiery backdrop of the riots, badge numbers blacked over with tape. The page refreshes. A man skinned by the asphalt when pulled from his car with both hands up. A police car plowing into a peaceful crowd. The hollow promises from white friends to do better. A cover up for how quickly they will bullet into our inboxes and ask us to hand them the answers. Black rubber bullets, the page refreshes. A woman's forehead skin split, page refreshes. A bloody hollow, refresh, take cover. Okay. All right. So in both of these Sestinas, what are we noticing about voice, and what are we noticing, excuse me, sort of about things that are being done with the texture, sort of changing the texture with italics, or things that are sort of being done with our inwords to sort of make them, to refresh them, to make them sort of different as they come back around. Yeah, homonyms, words with multiple meanings, allow for expanded impact. Yes, Nancy. The page refreshes, changes form from benign to haunting. Yeah, so in My Twitter feed becomes too much, we see how a sort of refrain or a sort of repeated thing gets transformed over the course of a sestina, which is kind of what we're wanting to happen, right? Part of the challenge of the sestina is how are we changing or transforming language over time? And you guys don't have to put everything in the chat. If you also want to raise your hand, if you want to unmute and talk, please feel free to do that as well. We are not just relegated to the chat. Hi, Cal, I see you.
Hi, Dr. Taylor.
Hi. Yes, I see you.
Hi, I have a question. So I have been writing sestinas for a few years now, and I have a question. Is it okay for them to be narrative in form? So to have to have a sestina where you're telling a story based on a personal experience?
Absolutely. Yes. That's absolutely okay. And I think that a lot of us will be starting those types of sestinas in this very workshop today when we get started with our exercises. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Of course. Thank you for asking. I love how hollow echoes with so many connotations, but also somehow sound. Yeah, let's look at hollow. So in the first line, right, it comes up as just hollow. Then we have hollowed there.
Hello.
Yeah, then we have eye hollows. So it sort of becomes I sort of make it into a compound word here in that fourth stanza. Then we have it as hollowed again. Yeah, so we are sort of slightly altering it right over time. We have cover, right? Looking at cover, we have cover up in one of the iterations of it. We have hand, and hand becomes hand drawn in one version, so it kind of breaks across the line. We have cover, phone covered. Yeah. I'm unclear on the structure of the envoy. Please explain. Yeah, absolutely. So we can go back to here. So the envoy, so it's either going to have your, it can be either of these two. So it can go ECA, the N words of ECA, or that it can be reversed. But the N words, the BDF N words, they have to appear somewhere in the envoy. Where those appear inside of the envoy is not, it doesn't really matter. They have to appear sort of somewhere in that 3-line stanza, but either the N words have to be either in the order of ECA or ACE. And then the BDF N words have to appear somewhere in the envoy besides the end.
Taylor, just to be clear on that again, I'm the one that asked the question, but so basically the last 3 lines must either end in words ECA or ACE. And then in the contents of those 3 lines, you need to include the words BDF.
Yes, that is correct.
And but it could be ECA or ACE as the endings, and it doesn't really matter which way you go as long as BDF are in the middle.
Yes, correct.
Okay, I think I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. No problem. Thank you for asking.
I think David Radovic has a question. I see
Hi,
it.
David.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Byas. My question is, when you're starting a Sestina, do you know the words you're going to use? And you find the 6 words and then you create the Sestina, or do you start writing and let some of the words, at least some of the words, emerge in the first stanza, and then you go from there?
Yeah, I typically start writing and I let the words emerge naturally for me. So, once you've sort of written your first stanza, your N words then are sort of, solidified by that first stanza. And so I typically will just start writing. If you are someone who, of course, responds to kind of giving yourself prompts, or if you like to give yourself exercises, you, of course, can predetermine your N words if that feels like a productive practice for you. But I definitely just start writing, and then I allow sort of what the poem is already doing to determine those N words for me. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Dr. Taylor.
Yes.
Hi, it's me again. I have a question about the end words. So
Yes.
if there is a word called hand in one stanza, then can the subsequent stanza have, instead of hand, a similar sounding word like land, let's say?
Well, it's up to you if you want to break the form in that way. But if you want to sort of stick very strictly to the form, I would say it would have to be some version or some form of hand.
Okay.
Yeah. Levon, I see your hand.
Great talk so far. I wanted to ask you a question about kind of playing with the form a little bit more. I remember years ago, there was a Sestina titled All American Sestina, in which the author moved those end words to the beginning of the line instead of at the end. And I kind of wanted to know if you've ever played with the form in that way.
I have not. When it comes to form, I feel very energized by sticking as strictly to the rules and restraints as I possibly can. And I do that because I also think in doing so, it forces me to find possibility in a way where I think breaking form doesn't necessarily push me to do so. And it pushes me out of my comfort zone as well when I have to sort of stick very strictly to the form. So I personally have not sort of experimented with breaking the form in that way. But of course, there are poets who are making those decisions and who are breaking form in all of these different ways. And again, that's a very individual choice and completely sort of up to you how closely you would like to stick to the form. But of course, for today's purposes, I hope that we will try to stick as close to it as possible as we sort of get started. Elaine, I see your hand. Oh, I think you're muted still.
Sorry.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I forgot. Thanks. I had when I tried to do one and I did get it done, but I did what you said about, starting with the first 6 lines. I figured, good, those will be my words. But I think another thing you guys were saying about the homonyms, so I think that's what happened. I went back and found some homonyms instead of the words I had originally chosen. And so then it's sort of easier to play with.
Yeah.
So that was just a comment about it. It's kind of like you said, it's kind of, both really, for starting. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. I'm just going to go through the comments we have in the chat here. I see Priscilla and Patricia Smith's poem, The Rhyming N-Words, right? Sun as in the, son of a mother, and then sun as the sun in the sky, right? They move the poem along and lend a magical effect, right? So talking more about the homonyms. Rob, you asked, what about meter? Is there usually a consistent rhythm? For the Sestina, there are no sort of meter requirements. The lines can be as short or as long as you would like them to be. So there are no meter or sort of rhythm requirements. Michael said, in Smith's Sestina, we get 3 nouns and 3 verbs for the N-words. That seems to give the poet more options for mixing up the energy at the end of each line. And Jeanne pointed out also words that can be both nouns and verbs. Yes, like hollow or bullet, which isn't a verb, but gets verbed. Yes, exactly. Brooke commented on the line length varies enough that the N-words are definitely done. It adds subtlety to the form. Yeah. Diana, the enjambment in your Sestina keeps the momentum of the poem going. Oh, enjambment, I love it. Let's talk about enjambment. Yes. So again, we're thinking about all of these ways. Ultimately, in the Sestina, you're thinking about how can I get my reader to move through that N-word that they're expecting and having it not feel expected. How can I pull them through that end line? How can I pull them through that N-word to the next line? Enjambment, right, is one of the things. The surprise of homonyms, right, popping up like a different word with the same sound. There's a sort of surprise there in which the reader is kind of thrown off kilter, right? That's also another question that we're asking ourselves as we're working on Sestina. How can I pull my reader through this line and into the next line, where they either don't feel like they're getting bored with this language, or they encounter some sort of surprise, right, that sort of re-energizes them as they're moving through this very, very long poem. David, I see your hand.
I was going to ask, you mentioned that the lines can be either short or long, but it strikes me that you need enough length to be able to do the envoy at the end. So I guess it would need to be at least kind of moderate to longish.
Yeah, I think Sestinas tend to lend themselves to kind of moderate line lengths for those very reasons. And I think as you sort of get into the sort of storytelling, I think that the Sestina requires, you find that you sort of need the space. And I think as we talk about moving through the Sestina, we will also find that to be true as we begin. So I want us to move into some very short writing exercises first before we sort of jump in. I like to sort of ease us in, test the water, put our toe in first. So we're going to do a little pre-work first. So I did mention that big ticket item right at the beginning. So I'm literally just going to give us quite literally 1 minute on the clock, 60 seconds right now. I want you to just take the next minute to decide on your big ticket item. What is your big ticket item for the Sestina going to be? And remember, this is something that you want some room to move around in. So this whatever topic, whatever content that you pick for the Sestina, this is something that you might have multiple ways that you want to talk about it. This might be a topic where you feel like you have a lot to say about it, and you need some room to kind of meander and walk through and spiral a little bit, but just take 60 seconds. What's my big ticket item going to be? Go. Okay. Now, under your big ticket item, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do some rapid fire word association. So under that big ticket item you've just selected, I want you to write down, just don't think too much about it, all the things that you associate with what you've picked. This can be items, people, places, memories, feelings, sounds. I want you to just take 3 minutes and try to list as many things as you possibly can that you associate with the big ticket item that you selected. 3 minutes. Okay, and as you're finishing up your word association list, I then want you to now just take 2 minutes to go over that list, circle the things that feel more significant, the things that feel bigger or heavier or louder than other things. Circle those words or circle those items that you've written down that feel more significant. And then simply underline some words that surprised you. So circle the big things, underline a few words that surprised you. So just about 2 minutes, or maybe just even a minute and a half to do that. Yeah. Make those last selections. Okay. So now we've got some building blocks. So those things that you circled that felt more sort of significant or heavy, those are going to be the potential rooms for your poem. So we're, again, thinking about the Sestina as a place with rooms that you can move around in. You can then sort of start to think about or start to map out how you're going to move through the Sestina. So you have these 6 big stanzas, which you can now sort of assign, right, a sort of topic or a room, and then you can kind of start making your way through those rooms, right? And I think part of why the Sestina also feels a little daunting sometimes is because you know that it's so large, and sometimes you just don't know where to go. And sometimes I think it's really helpful to maybe kind of have a plan beforehand. So then you're sort of, instead of writing from line 1 to 39, you're now sort of writing from one room into the next, which feels like a much more manageable task. Okay. If you are someone who likes to have predetermined end words, the words that you've underlined will be your possible end words if you would like to use those. If you would like to just organically start, write a stanza and use those as your end words, that is perfectly fine as well. But I like to give people the opportunity to sort of do both. David, I see you.
One question I thought of, since we have six end words and 6 stanzas, do some of the end words sort of govern a stanza? In other words, you might on one stanza emphasize one end word kind of more, and then another end word in a later stanza.
So the end words all have to appear in every stanza, and the challenge is they have to appear in a very specific order. And so I'm gonna drop that order sort of back into the chat so we have it when we start to sort of write further than the first stanza. But they have to all appear in each stanza. It's just a different order. Hey Cal, I see your hand.
Somehow I missed what a room is.
Yeah. So the room is basically each stanza that we're kind of talking about. I'm just framing the Sestina, thinking about those stanzas as sort of rooms, connected rooms that we can then move through. So instead of the Sestina feeling like, oh, I just have to kind of make it through this 39-line poem, we can now instead think about each of those 6-line stanzas as these little contained rooms where we can kind of focus on a part of, right, that big ticket item. And then we can figure out how to transition into that next room. So it kind of breaks it into more manageable pieces for us.
Okay.
Yeah. Melinda, I see you.
In the Sestina that you just you read for us, your Sestina about the Twitter, what are the rooms? What would you say the rooms are in your stanzas there?
I think the rooms for me in that particular case were like, I think, more emotional rooms for me. I sort of grouped sort of different pictures together that I think elicited kind of different emotional responses. And maybe even some of them I had encountered like in different times as well. So for me, some of the pictures that were grouped together were kind of connected because I sort of encountered those in a particular time when I was on the timeline, and then another group of pictures I sort of encountered together. So the rooms for me in that poem were definitely sort of more emotion based and time based. But of course, those rooms can look very different depending on, you know, what everyone's associations have been and what your sort of listing looks like. Yeah, one of the original meanings of stanza in Italian was room. Look at us. We're returning to the origins today in all of the ways. Okay. So with those building blocks, and again, you can use those underlined words as in words if you would like to sort of challenge yourself if you'd like, or you can just sort of organically begin your stanza if you want to. But let's start plotting it out. Okay. So we must first decide on the movement. We talked about having multiple rooms and sort of meandering through the Sestina. You also might find that your poem requires different types of movement, right? Is it a fluctuation, right? A movement between sort of two things back and forth, or are you sort of moving through more things, right? Either way, take a second to loosely plot out what you think the order of those movements will be, relying on that associative list that you just completed. So we're just going to take 2 minutes here and just try to figure out the order, right? What order am I going to sort of move in? How do I think I'm going to transition through these rooms? And just give yourself a sort of map to follow. 2 minutes. All right, try to finish up that quick map. And Joan, for the order, you don't have to worry about it for the first stanza right now, because the first stanza, you're deciding the order, right? That first stanza is just A, B, C, D, E, F. So you're deciding what you're basically assigning the letters, right, to the end words for that first stanza. When we move on, I will make sure that I put the order back into the chat for everyone to have, or I'll just go back to the slide in the PowerPoint so everyone can sort of look at it if that's more helpful, or I might do both just so you have it in both places. Okay, so we have a little map that we've made ourselves. So I'm gonna give us 5 minutes, and I want us to try to write the first stanza only, because we're gonna pause after that first stanza, and then we're gonna do another little writing thing together. But I just want you to just try to write that first stanza only. Don't stress about the end words. You can let them come to you organically, or you can use the predetermined ones from your list. And don't worry if the last line of this stanza isn't jammed into the next stanza. That doesn't matter at all. I just want you to try to get that first 6 lines down. 5 minutes on the clock. All right, try to finish up where you are. And hopefully, whether you sort of use predetermined ones or whether you sort of let them come to you naturally, you now have your handy dandy end words there for you. So we're going to pause on the poem, and we're going to think about the loosening of the language for a second. So this is sort of going to be the longest exercise that we do today. I want you to take your end words that you now have. Oh, I see your comment. This approach makes Sestina much more manageable. Yes, this is what I want. I'm so happy this is making it easier for you all to think about. Now that you have your inwards, I want you to take some time to just give yourself permission to just like tinker with the language. So just pause thinking about the poem as a whole. I want you to actually take the time to loosen up the way that your brain is thinking about your inwards, which will then help you as you move on, find refreshing ways to think about them, right? We talked about the homonyms earlier, and we talked about enjambment, all those sorts of things. So I want you to take each of your N-words in practice, just writing a few sentences for each of them in which you break the line on that selected N-word. In doing so, I want you to challenge yourself to use different parts of speech, right? We had a comment earlier about how some of the words were being used as both nouns and verbs, or sometimes a word was just verbed. We just kind of made it into a verb, right? Because we could do that as poets because we're, the coolest. Lean into homonyms, right? Think about words that might also contain your word within it. So maybe even like compound words. And you can also do like a wonderful Google search where you can say compound words that include, right, this word sometimes, and they'll sort of give you compound words. Yes, I will definitely share this presentation with Melinda after this. And I'm happy to do that so you guys have access to it. Absolutely. And so, for example, right, I've just given you guys a few examples to look at as you're sort of doing this exercise for yourself. So if one of my N-words was water, I might produce these sentences and sort of break it in these ways. So in this first instance, by the dried grass, I could guess the last time you watered it. So I kind of just broke in the middle of the word. This time on the inside of the window, a waterfall, right? So we have the compound word. We break in the middle of the compound word. I looked at you and felt that underwater feeling. So another compound word, but just water comes at the end. So on one, we break in the middle of the word. And then on the other, we sort of just have water sort of snuck into the compound word before the break, right? So that creates a different surprise. Just yesterday, I could swear to you the sky was water clear, right? So we sort of created a sort of compound word or a hyphenated word. We've made water a sort of adjective in this case, right? Describing another adjective, actually. So water describing how clear it is. So just do this for yourself, right? Feel free to verb nouns or noun verbs if it can go the other way. But just take some time for all of your N-words, just two or three sentences in which you find a different way to break them. I'm going to give us 10 minutes for this exercise because I want you to really sort of focus on those N-words. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end to just get back into the Sestina and write a little more. But I want you to really spend time on this exercise because I think it's the most important. So I'll put 10 minutes on the clock for us and do this for each of your N-words. All right. So try to finish up the last sentence that you're working on. Okay. And then for the remaining time, we're at 11:16. I want us to have a few minutes at the end just for sort of closing up and transitioning into the next. So I think I'll give us it's about 8 or 9 minutes, probably to the 25 mark, to just continue writing. So we're gonna go back to our Sestina. Oh, look, I thought ahead and I built the order into the slide. I will also put it into the chat just in case this is a little weird to look at. But return to your Sestina now with your sort of newfound appreciation for what the N-words can do and for what is possible, and try to move through those rooms. I'm going to go ahead and paste that order again into the chat so it is right there. And just a reminder that, BDF does have to appear in the Envoy, but unless you're just like furiously writing, I don't know if anyone's gonna get to the Envoy in the next 8 minutes, but hey, if you do, just remember that BDF does in fact need to be in there, just not on the N-words. Okay, so I'll give us until 25 mark, so that'll give us 88 minutes on the clock to just keep writing. Okay, we are at the end of our 8 minutes and right at the 25 mark. So hopefully we now feel like we have a place to go. We've mapped out a way to move through the Sestina. And I hope that we now feel energized and feel like we can absolutely tackle it now that it's broken up in some manageable pieces. If anyone has sort of any final questions or comments, happy to take those. And if not, I'm happy to also hand it back over to Melinda for any sort of last closing comments as we sort of transition into what I know is the open mic section of today. But yeah, raise your hands if you have closing comments or questions. Thank you so much, Nancy. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Caroline.
Shall we take it off the shared screen so we can see everybody? And that would be awesome. Yay. Well, Dr. Byas, I know for me, this is I just love going home with something that's like kind of great, actually. I'm excited about this. And
Good.
yeah, if anybody had any questions, I know you guys have questions.
I don't have a question so much as I just wanted to say, Dr. Byas, thank you so much for what you brought today. I've been confounded by Sestinas for years. And one of the things I really appreciate about your framework here is that, so often in a poem, I'm trying to move into territory where I have no idea where I'm going or what I'm doing. And with the formal constraints of the Sestina, I feel like that makes it impossible to get through. I get so bogged down in my own, cleverness and associations and turns. So I feel like you've given me a middle ground to work in, to do some thinking and plotting out ahead of time, and to then bring that kind of creative impulse to the things that came up during the associative process. So I feel very grateful for what feels like a really hopeful way to re-engage trying out this really challenging form.
Well, thank you so much for that, Michael. I'm glad it feels hopeful. I'm glad it feels hopeful now. And I'm seeing everyone's comments. It seems like people are feeling much better than we did when we came in about the form, and feeling excited to kind of go back and work on what you started. And that's why I'm here, and that's why we do these things. And so I'm thrilled to see that people are feeling that way. Thank you all for lending your time this morning and allowing me to be here. It is my pleasure to be in this room and to talk about poetry with people who love it as much as I do. So thank you so much for this space and for having me.
Yes, if everybody can unmute, and we got to give Dr. Byas all our love. Thank you.
That was awesome.
You. I really enjoyed this.
Thank
Got a lot out of it.
Wonderful session. Yes.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.